The fluorescent hum of the empty office felt louder at 8:30 p.m. David rubbed his eyes and returned to the quarterly reports. Numbers blurring together after 12 straight hours of work. Still here? Elena's voice made him look up. She stood in her office doorway, briefcase in hand, looking as polished as she had that morning, just finishing the Morrison projections. David gestured at his screen, wanted to double-check the variance calculations. Something flickered across her expression recognition, maybe approval. You always catch the details others miss, like that discrepancy in the third quarter data last month. The compliment felt different somehow. Personal. Not the usual professional acknowledgment. Elena gathered her coat. Don't pause. Don't go home yet, she whispered, almost to herself. David's pulse quickened. Was that? Her cheeks flushed pink. I didn't mean to say that out loud. She cleared her throat. I meant, would you like coffee? We could discuss the Morrison account. They both knew it wasn't really about work. 20 minutes later, they sat in her office with break room coffee. The Morrison file unopened between. Then why do we do this? Elena asked, gesturing at the empty building around them. Stay so late, I mean. Someone has to care about getting it right, David said. Exactly. Her eyes brightened. Sometimes I feel invisible despite all the meetings. And presentations. Like the work matters more than the cleaning crew's voices echoed from the hallway. Elena straightened immediately, her professional mask sliding back into place. We should probably call it a night, she said, but neither of them moved to leave. The elevator hummed softly as it climbed to the 32nd floor, and David caught himself checking his reflection in the polished steel doors for the third time that morning. 2 weeks had passed since the presentation that changed everything. He found himself arriving earlier and staying later, timing his schedule around the possibility of running into Elena. It was pathetic, really, a grown man lingering by the printer, taking the long route to the break room, volunteering for tasks that might bring him into contact with his supervisor. But he couldn't seem to help himself. You're here early again, Marcus observed, settling into his cubicle with his usual oversized coffee and a Danish from the lobby cafe. He glanced at David's computer screen, which displayed what appeared to be an analysis of quarterly performance. Metrics. Don't tell me you're actually starting to like this place. Last month you were talking about updating your resume. David minimized the spreadsheet he'd been pretending to work on in truth. He'd been staring at the same cells for 20 minutes, his mind replaying yesterday's brief encounter with Elena by the elevator bank. Just trying to stay ahead of things. You know how it is? Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. Yesterday, Johnson mentioned that Elena's been impressed with your initiative lately, said you've been contributing beyond your usual scope. That's not something you hear every day about junior associates. David's pulse quickened. Elena had been talking about him to their boss. He wondered what she'd said, whether she'd mentioned their increasingly frequent consultations, or the way their professional discussions seemed to veer into more personal territory. The truth was more complicated than Marcus could know. Yesterday, Elena had stopped by his desk to discuss the Morrison account strategy, a conversation that could have been handled in a 30-second email. Instead, they'd spent 20 minutes debating market positioning, their voices dropping to conspiratorial whispers as other colleagues passed by. When she'd leaned over his shoulder to point at something on his screen, it caught a hint of her perfume, something subtle and sophisticated that seemed to linger in his workspace long after she'd gone. The memory made his stomach flutter in a way that was distinctly unprofessional. He'd found himself Googling her perfume afterward, trying to identify the scent that had somehow imprinted itself in his memory. Hermes Jour de Hermes. He'd discovered expensive, elegant, completely out of his league, just like Elena herself. Earth to David, Marcus said, waving a hand in front of his face. You're doing that thing again where you zone out completely. Are you sure you're okay? Maybe you need more coffee? At 10:30. As if summoned by his thoughts, Elena appeared at his desk. She wore a navy blazer over a silk blouse, professional, yet somehow more approachable than her usual armor of executive wear. Her hair was pulled back in a softer style today, and when she smiled at him, David felt that familiar warmth spread through his chest. David, do you have a few minutes? I'd like your thoughts on the Hartwell campaign approach. She paused, glancing around the open office space where several colleagues were within earshot. "We could discuss it in my office." He nodded, gathering his notebook with hands that he hoped appeared steadier than they felt. This was the fourth time this week she'd sought his opinion on projects that technically fell outside his expertise. Marketing strategy, client relations, budget allocation, all areas where she had years more experience than he did. But she kept asking for his perspective, treating his insights with a seriousness that both thrilled and intimidated him as they walked toward her corner office. David was acutely aware of the curious glances from his colleagues. Sarah from accounting looked up from her computer with raised eyebrows, and he caught Marcus watching their interaction with barely concealed interest. In her office, she closed the door behind them, a small gesture, one she'd always done during their meetings, but now it felt charged with significance. The click of the latch seemed to isolate them from the rest of the corporate world, creating a private space where different rules might apply. "The Hartwell people want something edgy," she began, moving to her whiteboard where she'd sketched out preliminary concepts in her precise handwriting. "But their brand identity has always been conservative. Traditional values, family-oriented messaging, that sort of thing. I'm trying to find the balance between innovation and staying true to their core values." As she talked, David found himself watching the way she gestured, the slight crease that appeared between her eyebrows when she was thinking deeply. There was something almost hypnotic about her movements, confident and purposeful, yet somehow more relaxed when it was just the two of them. When she turned to face him, waiting for his response, he realized he'd been staring and hoped she hadn't noticed. "What do you think?" she asked, and there was something in her tone of softness that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago.
"I think,"
he said carefully, "that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all. Maybe Hartwell needs to evolve to stay relevant, even if it makes them uncomfortable." Elena smiled, and he felt that familiar warmth spread through his chest. "That's exactly what I was thinking." "You have good instincts, David." Their eyes held for a moment longer than strictly professional, and he wondered if she was thinking the same thing he was, that they were talking about more than just marketing strategies. The coffee shop Elena chose was tucked away on a side street downtown, the kind of place that attracted freelance writers and graduate students rather than corporate executives. Exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans created an atmosphere that was worlds away from their sterile office environment. David arrived first, claiming a corner table with a view of the entrance. His laptop opened to what looked like work, but was actually a document where he'd been typing and deleting the same sentence for 10 minutes when Elena walked in. Scanning the room until she spotted him, he felt his stomach flip. Away from the office, without the context of their professional roles, she seemed different, more vulnerable, somehow. She'd changed from her work clothes into dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that made her look younger, more approachable. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she carried a casual leather bag instead of her usual structured briefcase. "Thank you for meeting me here," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. The table was small, intimate, forcing them into closer proximity than any conference room would allow. "I know it's a bit unusual, but I wanted somewhere we could really focus on the presentation without interruptions." It was their third such meeting, and the pretense was wearing thin. The first time, they'd actually spent most of their 2 hours discussing the quarterly projections, with Elena taking notes in the margins of printed reports while David offered suggestions about demographic targeting. The second time, work talk had gradually given way to more personal conversation, Elena mentioning her morning yoga routine, David sharing his weekend hiking adventures. Today, David suspected the presentation materials Elena pulled from her bag might go untouched entirely. "Shh, no problem," he said, closing his laptop with perhaps more enthusiasm than appropriate. "Like this place. It's quiet, but not sterile like the office conference rooms." She ordered a cappuccino with an extra shot. He got black coffee, and they settled into the familiar rhythm of their collaboration. But 20 minutes in, as they debated the effectiveness of their current client retention strategies, Elena's phone buzzed insistently against the wooden table. She glanced at the screen, and her expression darkened, a shadow crossing her face that transformed her from the confident executive back to someone more human and fallible. "Sorry," she murmured, typing a quick response with more force than the phone's touchscreen required. "My ex-husband, he's—" She stopped, seeming to catch herself before revealing too much. "Work stuff. Complicated." David sensed an opening, a crack in the professional facade they maintained so carefully. In the warm lighting of the coffee shop, with the gentle murmur of other conversations around them, the corporate hierarchy that defined their relationship seemed less relevant somehow. "You don't have to apologize. We all have complicated stuff." Outside the office, Elena looked at him for a long moment as if weighing something. Her fingers worried the handle of her coffee cup, and he could see her internal debate playing out across her features. Then, unexpectedly, she began to talk. "Divorced 18 months ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup like it was an anchor in stormy seas. 23 years of marriage, and it just ... dissolved. Like sugar and water. Said I was married to my career, that I'd chosen success over family. Maybe he was right. The confession hung between them, more intimate than anything that had passed between them in all their previous interactions. David felt something shift in the air, the conversation crossing into territory they'd never explored before. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "The hardest part," Elena continued, staring into her cappuccino foam as if it might hold answers, "is that I worked so hard to build this life, this career, and now. What's the point of success if you have no one to share it with? I go home to an empty condo every night, order takeout from the same 3 restaurants, and review reports until I fall asleep on the couch. Pathetic, right?" Her honesty was startling, and David felt his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Here was Elena Morrison, the woman who commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals, admitting to the same loneliness that kept him awake at night scrolling through social media, wondering when his life would begin to feel meaningful. "That's not pathetic," he said firmly. "That's human. And I know that feeling. Not the divorce part, but the ... emptiness. Sometimes I think I'm just going through the motions, waiting for my real life to start. Like everything I'm doing now is just rehearsal for something more important that might never come." Lena looked up at him, and her eyes were brighter than usual, as if tears were threatening but hadn't quite formed. "You're 26, David. Your real life is ahead of you. You have time to figure it out, to make different choices." "Is it though?" Leaned forward, abandoning the caution that usually governed their interactions. "I feel like I'm always trying to prove I'm good enough. At work, in relationships, even to myself. Like I'm constantly one mistake away from everyone realizing I don't belong anywhere." "You belong," Elena said firmly, and then before he could process what was happening, her hand covered his on the table. The touch was electric, sending warmth, shooting up his arm and straight to his chest. Her skin was soft, her fingers cool from holding her coffee cup. The contact lasted maybe 3 seconds, ostensibly to emphasize her point, but neither of them pulled away immediately. In those 3 seconds, David felt something fundamental shift between them, an acknowledgment that whatever was happening went far beyond professional mentorship. When she finally moved her hand back to her coffee cup, they both pretended not to notice the lingering warmth, the way the simple contact had changed the entire atmosphere of their conversation. But the air between them hummed with new tension, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. "We should probably get back to the presentation," Elena said, but her voice had lost its conviction, and she made no move toward the forgotten materials scattered across their table. "Probably," David agreed, but neither of them reached for the forgotten materials instead. They talked for another hour about dreams deferred and chances not taken, about the strange way life never quite turned out as planned. Elena told him about the art history degree she'd abandoned for business school, how she sometimes stood in museums and wondered what her life might have looked like if she'd been braver at 22. David shared his secret ambition to write the novel he'd been working on for 2 years that he'd never shown anyone. The fear that pursuing creativity meant accepting financial instability. When they finally parted ways in the parking lot, the sun setting behind the downtown buildings, They'd established a pattern neither was willing to name. Same time next week, always with some work-related justification. Always dancing around the growing connection they both felt but couldn't acknowledge. As David drove home, he caught himself smiling at red lights, replaying the moment when Elena's hand had touched his, wondering what it might mean and whether he was brave enough to find out. The Marriott Conference Center was a study in corporate blandness, beige carpets that had seen too many conventions, motivational posters about synergy and innovation that no one actually read, and the persistent smell of burnt coffee that seemed to permeate every hotel hosting business events. David stood in the lobby at 7:30 Friday morning, checking his phone for the third time while waiting for Elena to appear, his overnight bag at his feet and his stomach churning with nervous anticipation. When the elevator opened and she emerged, pulling a small wheeled suitcase behind her, he felt that familiar flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. She dressed professionally, but casually, charcoal slacks and a silk blouse the color of sage instead of her usual soutane. Something about seeing her in this context, away from their usual environment, made everything feel more significant, more real. David threw himself into his work, staying late to avoid the possibility of empty elevator rides or chance encounters by the coffee machine. But the harder he tried to focus on spreadsheets and campaign analyses, the more his mind wandered to the memory of Elena's face in the string light, the way her voice had caught when she'd admitted feeling more alive around him. By Wednesday afternoon, he was questioning everything. Had he misread the signals? Was the weekend's confession simply a moment of vulnerability that she now regretted? The uncertainty was eating at him, but Elena's newfound distance made it impossible to address. Marcus noticed his distraction during their Thursday morning team meeting. "You okay, man? You seem a million miles away. Just tired?" David lied, forcing his attention back to the budget projections on his screen. But the real test came Thursday evening, when Marcus suggested an impromptu team happy hour at Murphy's Pub, the Irish bar 2 blocks from their office building. It was the kind of casual after-work gathering that Elena typically avoided. But to David's surprise and nervous anticipation, she appeared at their reserved table, just as the waitress was taking the second round of drink orders. "Sorry, I'm late," she said, sliding into the only remaining chair, which happened to be directly across from David. The Morrison call ran long. She ordered a glass of wine and made appropriate small talk with the team, asking about weekend plans and commenting on the unusually warm weather, but David noticed the way her fingers drummed against her wine glass, the slight tension in her shoulders that suggested she was as uncomfortable with the forced casualness as he was. As the evening progressed, David found himself relaxing into the familiar rhythm of office camaraderie. Marcus was telling an animated story about a client meeting gone wrong. Sarah from accounting was debating the merits of various dating apps. Even Elena seemed to be genuinely enjoying herself, laughing at Marcus's impressions of their more difficult clients. But when David joined in with his own client horror story, a presentation where every piece of technology had failed spectacularly, he caught Elena watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not the careful professional mask she'd worn all week, but something softer, more wistful. Their eyes met across the table, and for just a moment, the noise of the pub seemed to fade. Elena's smile faltered slightly, and David saw something there that looked like regret, or longing, or maybe both. The moment broke when Sarah called Elena's attention to a question about the upcoming quarterly reviews, but David felt the familiar warmth spreading through his chest. Whatever had happened over the weekend, whatever professional concerns were keeping Elena distant, the connection between them hadn't disappeared. As the group began to disperse around 9 o'clock early meetings the next morning, babysitter, schedules, the usual excuses, Elena lingered while the others gathered their coats and said their goodbyes, when only David remained at the table.
Yes.
Finishing the last of his beer, Elena moved to the chair beside him. "We need to talk," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the pub's ambient noise. David's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Okay, not here." She glanced around the crowded bar. "Can you meet me at the office?" 20 minutes, he nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. Elena gathered her purse and jacket, offered a casual goodnight that anyone observing would have found perfectly appropriate, and walked out into the evening air. David sat alone for a few minutes, finishing his beer and trying to prepare himself for whatever conversation awaited him. Then he paid his tab and headed back to their building, his heart racing with anticipation and uncertainty. The office building after hours had an almost ethereal, quality fluorescent lights dimmed to security levels, the usual bustle replaced by the quiet hum of climate control systems and distant traffic. David's keycard granted him access to the 32nd floor, where he found Elena already waiting in her office, pacing behind her desk like a caged animal. She'd removed her blazer, and her silk blouse seemed to glow in the soft light from her desk lamp. When she looked up at his gentle knock on her open door, her expression was a mixture of determination and vulnerability that made his chest tight. "Close the door," she said, and her voice carried a weight that told him this conversation would change everything between them. David stepped inside and pushed the door shut with a soft click that seemed to echo in the quiet office. Elena continued her restless movement from desk to window to the small conference table in the corner, as if stillness might make her lose her nerve. "This is complicated, David," she began, not looking at him. "I'm your supervisor. You're 7 years younger than me. I don't want to hurt your career or mine, or—" She trailed off, pressing her palms against the cool glass of her office window. "What if I'm willing to accept complicated?" David asked quietly, the words he'd been rehearsing since Thursday night finally finding voice. "What if I think some things are worth the risk?" Elena turned then, and he could see the internal battle playing out across her face. Professional responsibility warring with personal desire, corporate hierarchy colliding with human connection. "Don't understand what you're saying," she said, but there was less conviction in her tone now. "If anyone found out if this affected your position here, my position here matters less than what I feel when I'm with you," David said, taking a step closer. "Elena, I've spent weeks trying to convince myself that I was imagining this thing between us, but I wasn't, was I?" The question hung in the air, demanding honesty they'd both been avoiding. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, the professional mask had finally slipped completely. "No," she whispered. "You weren't imagining it." The admission seemed to unlock something in her, and suddenly the words came pouring out, weeks of suppressed feelings and careful restraint giving way to raw honesty. "I've been lonely since my divorce," she said, moving away from the window to lean against her desk. "Not just alone, but lonely in a way that felt like it might be permanent. Like I'd chosen ambition over connection so many times that I'd forgotten how to make that choice differently." David wanted to move closer, to offer comfort, but something in her posture told him she needed space to finish what she'd started. "And then you came along," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. "With your questions that make me think differently, your insights that challenge my assumptions, your way of seeing straight through all my professional armor to something I'd almost forgotten existed." "What's that?" David asked softly. "The version of myself I actually like," she said, and her smile was sad and beautiful at the same time. "The woman who takes chances, who trusts her instincts, who isn't afraid of being vulnerable." David took another step forward, and this time she didn't retreat. "That woman sounds pretty amazing." "She's also terrified," Elena admitted. "Terrified of being unprofessional, of people thinking she's abusing her position, of getting hurt again when someone realizes that career success doesn't make up for emotional unavailability." "Elena," David said, close enough now that he could. "See the uncertainty in her eyes? I've never felt so understood by anyone in my life. You don't make me feel like I have to prove I'm good enough. You make me feel like I already am." Her composure cracked then, and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "This could ruin everything," she whispered. "The best thing that's ever happened to either of us," he replied, reaching up to touch her face gently. "I can't promise it won't be complicated, but I can promise that what I feel for you isn't going anywhere, whether we act on it or not." Elena leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as if she was memorizing the sensation. When she opened them again, the last of her resistance seemed to dissolve. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Neither do I," David admitted. "But I'd like to figure it out with you." Elena searched his face for a long moment, looking for certainty in a situation that offered none. Then, finally, she stepped closer, closing the distance between them until he could feel her breath against his lips. "We'll have to be careful," she whispered. "We will be," he promised. "And discreet. Absolutely. And if it affects your work, or if people start to talk." David silenced her concerns by brushing his lips against hers, soft and tentative at first, then deeper when she didn't pull away. The kiss was everything their weeks of professional distance had been building toward, tender and hungry at the same time, a release of tension that left them both breathless. When they finally separated, Elena rested her forehead against his, her eyes still closed. "We're really doing this," she said, and it wasn't quite a question. "Only if you want to," David replied. Though his heart was hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it, Elena opened her eyes and looked at him with an expression that was part wonder, part determination. "I want to," she said. "God help me. I really want to." They kissed again, longer this time, and David felt like he was falling and flying simultaneously. When they broke apart, both were smiling, despite the magnitude of what they'd just committed to. "So what happens now?" he asked. "No," Elena said, straightening her blouse and running her hands through her hair in an attempt to restore some semblance of professional appearance. "We figure out how to be whatever this is while keeping our jobs and our sanity intact." "All," David teased, and was rewarded with Elena's first genuine laugh in a week. "That's all," she confirmed, but her eyes were bright with possibility. "Should be simple, right?" They both knew it would be anything but simple. But as they prepared to leave the office separately, maintaining the careful distance they'd now have to master, both carried the warmth of finally acknowledged truth, the thrilling uncertainty of whatever came next. The coffee machine became their secret language. 1 sugar packet meant thinking of you. 2 meant can we talk later? David would drop his signal and walk away, catching Elena's slight smile. Professional meetings transformed overnight. Elena's eyes would find David's across conference tables, giving him her complete attention even in rooms full of senior staff. His confidence-bloomed colleagues noticed his newfound assertiveness. "David's really come into his own," Janet told. Marcus, much more self-assured. Elena fought her own battles, wanting to shield David from criticism while maintaining professional standards. The pretense exhausted her. Evening conversations moved to Vintner's, a wine bar across town where they could talk freely without fear of discovery. "I've never brought anyone from work home," Elena said. Fumbling with her apartment keys, her place revealed hidden depths art covering every wall. Evidence of abandoned curator dreams. Over dinner, she shared stories of professor, parents, and Connecticut dinner table debates. David talked about his grandmother who raised him after his parents died, teaching him chess every Sunday. "She said chess would teach me to think ahead, see all possibilities," David explained. "I'd like to meet her someday," Elena said, the words heavy with implication. Later, soft jazz playing, Elena asked him to dance. They swayed in her living room, both acknowledging this felt like more than attraction. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "I know. I'm scared too." They talked until midnight about tentative futures department transfers, new opportunities. No easy answers. But they decided it was worth trying. Marcus's voice in the hallway sent them springing apart as David helped Elena prepare board materials. They barely maintained composure as he appeared in her doorway. Worse was the team meeting, where James questioned David's analysis condescendingly. Elena defended him professionally, but coldly, hating how distant she had to sound. During Elena's board presentation, David sat proudly in the back, unable to show it when directors praised insights built on his work. The weight of secrecy was crushing them both. "My family has a cabin 2 hours north," Elena suggested. Very private. The lakeside retreat was perfectly imperfect. Saturday brought real breakfast with Elena singing while cooking. Hiking trails from her childhood, David identifying bird calls his grandmother taught him. That evening on the deck, watching sunset paint the lake, Elena admitted, "I applied for a part-time gallery position. I think being with you is making me braver." "I'm falling in love with you," David said. "I know. I'm falling in love with you too." They talked honestly about their situation, Elena transferring departments, David exploring other companies. They decided to build something real together. Whatever it took, Marcus was visiting his in-laws, when he spotted David's car at the neighboring cabin. Seeing Elena emerge in casual clothes, David kissing her temple with comfortable intimacy. Everything clicked. Monday morning, conference room. B. Now. "I saw you this weekend," Marcus said without preamble. David's stomach dropped. "Marcus, you're involved with Elena, your supervisor. I love her." The honesty stopped Marcus cold. "This isn't some fling. No, we're trying to figure out how to make it work." Marcus weighed his options. Friendship versus policy, loyalty versus concern. "I won't report this, but be smart. If I figured it out, someone else will too. Fix this situation quickly." "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've both survived this without destroying your careers." Finally honest about what they wanted. Finally willing to take the leap together. Elena stared at the blank HR transfer request form for the 4th time that week, her untouched coffee growing cold. Beside her keyboard, the cursor blinked mockingly at her on the screen, waiting for a decision that felt like choosing between her heart and everything she'd worked to build over the past 8 years. 3 floors down, she could see David hunched over his laptop. During what should have been his lunch break, methodically scrolling through job listings with the same analytical precision he brought to quarterly budget reviews. The Peterson Group posting was bookmarked in his browser, their biggest competitor, offering a senior analyst position with a 20% salary increase that would solve their ethical dilemma by removing him from the equation entirely. They'd been living in an increasingly fragile bubble for months now. Stolen conversations in empty conference rooms after the cleaning crew had gone home. Text messages carefully crafted to sound professional while hiding deeper meanings. The exhausting daily choreography of appearing appropriately distant while their hearts raced whenever they found themselves alone in an elevator or passing in the hallway. The weight of secrecy was slowly crushing what should have been the happiest period of Elena's life. She'd catch herself smiling at her computer screen when David sent project updates, then immediately glance around to see if anyone had noticed. Every shared laugh had to be measured, every casual touch avoided, every natural impulse suppressed. "I've been thinking seriously about the Peterson Group opportunity," David had told her the night before, his voice carefully neutral as they stood in her kitchen. "The strategic analysis division there could use someone with my background. Won't let you sacrifice your career trajectory for this," Elena had replied, even as the thought of him leaving felt like losing an essential part of herself. "There has to be another solution. And I won't watch you transfer to corporate communications just to eliminate our reporting conflict," David had countered, his jaw set with quiet determination. "You'd be miserable there, and we both know it." As the days passed, however, that elusive third option seemed increasingly impossible. Elena had even scheduled a preliminary meeting with HR for Friday afternoon. Though the thought of explaining the situation made her stomach clench with anxiety, that Thursday afternoon, salvation arrived in the most mundane form possible, a company-wide email with the subject line, Q2 Organizational Restructuring Initiative. Elena read it twice, her pulse quickening with each bullet point outlining new departmental alignments. Strategic Operations Division, Market Analysis Team, Restructuring. Shifted reporting hierarchies that would eliminate conflicts of interest. Without requiring anyone to abandon their career path, she practically ran to David's cubicle, forgetting to maintain her usual professional distance. "Conference room B, 5 minutes, she whispered urgently. Forwarding him the email, his eyes lit up as he scanned the announcement, focus zeroing in on one particular section. Strategic Operations Division reports directly to Richardson. He. Read aloud. "That would put me completely outside your department structure. We might actually have a legitimate shot at making this work," Elena breathed, hope flooding her voice for the first time in weeks. The gradual revelation began with Marcus, who had been watching their careful dance for months with growing amusement and occasional concern. His solution was characteristically direct: organize mandatory group activities, where they could interact naturally without raising suspicions. "You two aren't nearly as subtle as you imagine," he murmured over his beer at the first organized happy hour, catching the way David's hand automatically moved to steady Elena's chair when she leaned forward. "Completely safe with me, although you might want to work on your poker faces during budget presentations." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. Are we really that transparent? But as someone who's been watching, the way you both suddenly became interested in each other's project timelines, the mysterious simultaneous coffee breaks, David's newfound enthusiasm for staying late on nights when you're working, it's not exactly rocket science. Elena's assistant proved even more perceptive than Marcus. 3 weeks later, she knocked on Elena's office door with a knowing smile and closed it behind her. "I've been covering for you for months," she admitted without preamble. "Rescheduling your afternoon meetings when David's presentations run long, making diplomatic excuses when you both disappear into conference rooms together for project discussions that somehow never generate any official documentation. The way your entire demeanor changes when he emails you. Dead giveaway to anyone who manages your calendar." Elena felt mortification wash over her. How obvious have we been? To someone who coordinates your daily schedule and has been watching, you transform from a workaholic who never smiled during meetings into someone who actually laughs at budget reviews? Completely obvious. But here's the thing, you're genuinely good for each other. David's been volunteering for presentations he used to avoid like the plague, and you've started leaving the office before 9 p.m. for the first time since I've worked here. Whatever you're doing, don't stop. Gradually, with the restructuring providing cover, they began letting their guard down in small but meaningful ways. David brought Elena coffee without manufacturing elaborate explanations about being near the break room anyway. Elena lingered at his desk to discuss projects that could have been handled via email, letting their conversations drift naturally from quarterly projections to weekend plans to favorite restaurants. Their colleagues noticed the shift but seemed more entertained than scandalized. The office betting pool quietly evolved from "will they or won't they?" to "when will they make it official?" Janet from accounting won $43 when they sat together at the company holiday party, David's hand resting openly on Elena's shoulder as they shared a quiet laugh about something on her phone. The gossip mill buzzed intensely for exactly 1 week before moving on to the far more scandalous news of the CFO's very public and very messy divorce proceedings. Chapter 3. The New Normal. 6 months later.
Elena
Stood in the elegant church vestibule, adjusting David's tie with fingers, still bearing faint traces of cerulean blue watercolor paint from the previous evening's art class. Marcus's wedding had become their first truly official public appearance as a couple, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this genuinely relaxed at a company-sponsored event. "Senior Strategic Analyst David Chen," she said, testing out his new title from the freshly restructured Strategic Operations Division. "I have to admit, it has a rather distinguished ring to it." The promotion had exceeded all their expectations. David's analytical capabilities were perfectly suited to strategic market planning, and the new reporting structure had finally liberated them from the ethical complications that had kept them hiding their relationship for so long. More significantly, the confidence that had grown between them in private was now manifesting in every aspect of his professional life. "Remember when you used to decline presentation opportunities and volunteer other people instead?" Elena teased, carefully brushing a microscopic speck of blue paint from her thumb. David laughed. "Oh," unconsciously straightening his shoulders with newfound confidence. "Now I actively volunteer for them." Strange how everything changes when you stop being paralyzed by the fear of taking calculated risks. The transformation had been entirely mutual. Elena glanced at her watch, 6:45 p.m. on a Friday evening, and for the first time in her professional career, she wasn't mentally calculating how many additional hours she needed to work to stay ahead of her deadlines. The Thursday evening art classes had become sacred, inviolable time. To precious hours every week where quarterly projections and budget analyses simply couldn't follow her. She'd even taken the unprecedented step of hanging one of her watercolor landscapes in her office, a small but meaningful rebellion against the sterile, impersonal corporate aesthetic she'd maintained religiously for years. "We're genuinely good for each other," she realized aloud, unconsciously echoing her assistant's astute observation from months earlier. David's hand found hers as the opening notes of the wedding march began. The best partnerships usually are worth the investment of patience. Nearly a year later, the familiar evening tranquility had settled over the office like a comfortable, well-worn blanket. The cleaning crew wouldn't arrive for another hour, leaving only the most dedicated employees to work in peaceful solitude under the gentle hum of fluorescent lights that had witnessed the entire arc of their relationship. Elena saved her quarterly budget projections and stretched her neck, stiff from spending the afternoon hunched over complex financial analyses. Across the expansive office floor, she could see David in his new strategic operations workspace, completely absorbed in what appeared to be an intricate market penetration analysis. His brow furrowed in the intense concentration she'd grown to love. She gathered her belongings slowly and deliberately, remembering another evening one that felt simultaneously like yesterday and a lifetime ago, when leaving the office had felt emotionally impossible, when choosing to stay late had fundamentally altered the entire trajectory of her life. Now she walked openly across the polished concrete floor, her heels clicking with quiet confidence, no longer calculating who might observe them or what professional implications their interactions might carry. "Don't go home yet," she said, standing beside his desk with complete and intentional clarity this time. David looked up, that familiar, transformative grin spreading across his face like sunrise breaking over the horizon. "Is that an invitation?" "Always," Elena replied without hesitation, reaching naturally for his hand. They walked out together into the cool evening air, fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. Asked the security guard who'd observed their careful months-long dance, and now simply nodded with genuine approval. No more stolen glances or perfectly choreographed coincidental encounters. No more mentally weighing every casual interaction against potential professional consequences or ethical violations. As they reached the parking garage, David found himself reflecting on the extraordinary year behind them, the risks taken, the growth experienced, the love discovered in the most unexpected of circumstances. Sometimes the most meaningful love stories begin not with grand romantic gestures or perfectly orchestrated timing, but with the simple, profound courage to stay a little longer when every logical instinct says to leave. To risk saying exactly, "What do you mean?" when silence feels infinitely safer and more professional. To trust completely that taking a genuine chance on someone really taking that leap of faith might change not just your evening plans, but everything that follows. The best relationships he discovered through careful observation and lived experience grow organically from authentic friendship and mutual understanding. From finding someone who sees clearly past your carefully constructed professional facade to the real person underneath, sometimes love arrives disguised as a work project, as late nights that gradually become less about meeting pressing deadlines and more. They drove toward their shared future. The office building, growing progressively smaller in the rearview mirror. Two people who'd learned through experience that the most unexpected places can hold exactly what you've been unconsciously searching for your entire life. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to say "don't go home yet," the person you're meant to build a life with will always answer, without hesitation, always.